What if there's actionable advice that could inspire your holistic legacy planning? I have the pleasure to introduce you to Scherrie Prince. She's an attorney based out of Mississippi. She joins us today to talk about legal strategies and other insightful information she knows when it comes to the legal structures for your legacy. Welcome, Scherrie.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is my pleasure. So, to begin, would you provide a little bit of context? I think that in prior podcasts, you mentioned that you grew up on a farm and you had some personal experiences regarding family and what it is to divide up an estate when there is a plan or when there's not one.
And look, I wish we had more than an hour because that story can take all day, but I will sum it up for you. Yes, I grew up on a farm with my grandparents after my mother passed away. And, we did not have a lot of planning at all in the family. My mother passed when she was 16, when I was 16 and she was 36. And at the time, there was no inheritance. There was no choice of guardian. And there really wasn't a plan for what would happen to my brother and myself after her passing. So we kind of bounced around before we made it to my grandparents' house. And it really wasn't that bad. Great people, 150 plus acre farm. In the summertime, we would help with crops and things like that. But it wasn't until I was a little older and they passed away and it was time to actually divide their assets up. Both my grandmother and my grandfather died without a will or a trust. And you kind of think you know people until there's money or property. So, I kind of saw a different side of some of my aunts and uncles, and it did not go well. So that was my first inkling that I wanted to do something to help other people who maybe did not understand the estate planning process or just really the concept of legacy.
Yeah, what I find so interesting about that story is how young you were. So the impression that it would have made on your psyche at that time. And I know that today you're a very successful attorney and you learned firsthand what it feels like when there's not a plan. And I think a lot of the times, and I've said this before on my podcast, about two-thirds of today's affluent are self-made, which means that they were not having conversations around planning at their kitchen table, at their dining room table. It was about probably survival or just there's so many different blind spots. But I just thought, wow, here is a courageous woman who has had to learn firsthand how to put the puzzle pieces in place in order to figure out how to make the moving parts work. So it's easier, not harder, for yourself as well as for the overall family. So there's not, I think the word you used was shenanigans.
Yes, there were shenanigans. And that was just like my first intro regarding how not to estate plan. And, fast forward, I got into my very first business with a partner, and that was not a good situation. So at the end of the day, it made me really want to work with entrepreneurs and show them how to build a moat around their business and personal assets so that they did not, meet the same fate that I did and have to learn the hard lessons.
Yes. Well, I think that you have definitely learned through trial and error regarding what works. I also know part of your background was you were very successful in business. You had your MBA, and then you made a conscious choice before we dive into the principles, the legal principles, to choose to go back to law school as an adult, which again is amazing. And I hope it inspires the women listeners out there that you can pursue your dreams no matter whether you have children or no matter your age, because you made some choices at that time that, finding babysitters and multitasking. And it wasn't just that it was easy, there was a passion in your heart.
Exactly. I believe my son was 6 months old. So I had a 6 month old and a 3 year old when I went to law school. And it wasn't easy. At the time, I had my MBA, but I actually worked for $5.25 an hour part time during law school. And ends did not always meet. But I knew that what I was working towards would actually bring me to where I am today so that I can actually help people. Practically, I understand what happens. And then from a legal perspective, I've given myself the skills, training, and now the experience to go out and actually help people to put together a plan for their business and their personal life.
Yes, yes. I think it's just wonderful. It's an investment that you made in yourself. Okay. So thank you for speaking into the early stages of your entrepreneurial journey. You have spoken into this idea of legal principles. So, whether you're wearing the hat of an attorney, a licensed attorney in Mississippi, or a coach that helps individuals all around the world, would you share one or two legal principles that can start someone where they're at today, no matter their age, whether they're in Brazil or India or one of the BRICS nations, of looking at their legacy or their business planning and something practical that they can commence with?
Sure. Um, Now, in America, we call it testate versus intestate succession. So, testate succession would be someone who passed away with a will. Intestate succession is someone who passed away without a will. And so, when you're looking at personal legacy planning, I think that the basic understanding of these two terms is one of the most powerful because it will tell you what your plan is. If you die testate with a will, that means you have something in writing and you know where your assets are going to go, when you expire. But if you died without a will, most governments they actually have a plan for you in terms of who will get what and what percentage. And so that's one of the big things that I tell people. You really need to have a plan, even if it's a small plan. It does not have to be elaborate. It does not, take thousands of dollars that you're paying an attorney to craft a plan, but you need something in place.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you had spoken about at that time, let me see if I can get this right. This came from one of your prior podcasts, that you had to deal with not just the, uh, the division within family, but you also had to deal with, I think at that time, um, gosh, I'm trying to find it in my notes. There was a settlement, and your family actually broke it into two estates in learning on the fly, learning in that moment.
Yes, there was this litigation for minority farmers that, entitled the heirs of my grandparents to receive a sum of money. And, there was a portion of the family that applied for the funding and they didn't tell the other fraction of the family. So there were these funds that belonged to my grandparents' estate that had to be divvied up based on our heirship to my grandparents. And that just was not a good time. So we actually had to probate my grandfather and my grandmother's estate to actually divvy those funds up.
Yes. Well, I just thought it was interesting that it seemed like in the end the government was somewhat fair.
Now, oh, and that's a whole nother story.
Okay, all right. So, one of the points that you've made previously, and I concur wholeheartedly, is it's better to have a plan than not to have a plan, or failure to have a plan is a plan itself. And then, in addition to that, somebody has to update their plan regularly. I know you made a point that just as somebody might leave the chiropractor or the physician's office, the nice receptionist says, "Okay, well, let's make sure that we book your appointment 1 year out." And yet, oftentimes, when it comes to somebody's legacy, number one, people aren't even doing it. And number two, they're not even thinking to revisit it like a physician's checkup 1 year later to make sure that their legal documents, whether it's the trust, which we're going to chat about more in a moment, or even just the will or some of those other health directive, HIPAA, living wills, all of those different documents that I'm sure you're going to introduce us to in a moment, they're not even returning a year later. And so you've made a point that sometimes it's like people can get married, they can get divorced, and then like the judgments can come, and people are not taking the time and common sense to invest in themselves to update their paperwork. Do you want to speak into this for a moment? Because I thought this was just, an everyday blind spot.
Oh, definitely. Um, Anytime someone is planning, whether it's for their personal assets or their business assets, I like to tell people to start your planning with an exit plan, or it's better said by Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind. Know that we all have an expiration date, and at your expiration date, whether it's an early exit or you're blessed to live, later in life, what do you want that to look like? So when I talk about an exit, um, it may not just be death. If we're talking about a business, it could be the dissolution of a partnership. It could be a bankruptcy. It could be a restructuring, a merger. But what does your exit look like? So we start there in terms of beginning with the end in mind. And we put together a team because much like children, it takes a village to actually build a business. You do have a lot of solopreneurs, mompreneurs, and they have all these, new terms for people that are in business. But it does take a team.
Yes, I recall that one of the things you mentioned is how valuable it is to have a tax planner, not just a tax preparer, but a tax planner. And I'm going to have you expound upon that in a moment. And then to have the tax planner chat with the CPA regularly and often. in terms of kicking that soccer ball forward again with the end in mind. Say more.
Oh, yeah. So there are times that people will, employ someone to prepare their taxes, and then they feel surprised when they get this huge tax bill. Well, you need to understand the difference between a tax preparer and a tax planner. Someone who is preparing your taxes, they are just putting together a report for what has happened in the previous year. A tax planner is someone who is forward thinking, someone who's looking at the windshield and telling you, okay, this is where you need to go. Think about it like GPS. It's telling you where to turn, when to turn, how long it's going to take you to get there. And so making sure that you have either both those individuals or one person who can do both functions for you is so important. And making sure that they actually talk to the rest of your team as well.
Yes. In terms of building one's team, I thought about it in almost three categories: intellectual property, which you referred to something called NIL, name, image, and likeness. And this is where I thought we would bring up the idea of the 12-year-olds that are becoming millionaires on TikTok and Utah and YouTube, as well as the college students that are now finding themselves with e-commerce income, where they may not even have to finish college, and then we'll transition it to personal property and real property. But would you say more about this idea of name, image, and likeness?
Well, I think so many people discount the value of their intellectual property. Um, I often tell people that if I had one asset in my estate plan, I would love to have the intellectual property rights to Michael Jordan's logo for Air Jordan. That is 1 billion. I say one, it is a single $1 billion asset. And
Yes.
so people leave so much on the table. Consider a restaurant. So you have the value of the real estate. You have the goodwill from the name if it's, a profitable chain and they have good service. You have the name itself, which has value. You may have a product in there that may have a patent or a copyright, just, depending on whatever proprietary rights you have. So you can have, what you think is one asset, but there are so many different types of value. And I actually have some clients that come to me and they're coming to me for a real estate deal. So, hey, I'm selling my barbershop. Okay. Are you just selling the land? Are you also selling the business? Will the new owner retain the phone number because there's value in your phone number? Are you giving them the name, the right to use the name? Are they going to license the name? So there are so many different assets you have, but a lot of people just think about real property and personal property, but there's a lot more on the table.
It's interesting you bring that up. I think Domino's Pizza had a similar scenario where the initial founder of Domino's, he bought I think the restaurant, it was like a college town in Michigan or somewhere. And then he ran into a stumbling block because of the name. And then he had to change it up a little bit, and never knowing that Domino's Pizza was going to become the success that it was going to become. Yes. And another point to piggyback off of what you just shared, the estate of Robin Williams, he had realized that his name and the brand and even the hologram, all of those aspects was going to possibly be worth more after he passed for the next 60 to 100 years than during his lifetime. And I thought that's so interesting because you're right. There are these TikTok celebrities and these
Exactly.
influencers, and for the first time in their life, they're coming across fame and success and residual income that they were never taught about, whether it was in public or private school, and yet they are having to make decisions and hopefully being surrounded by a great team of trustworthy individuals. Yes.
Well, and backing up a little bit, you talked about TikTokers who are millionaires, just from YouTube and clicks. Those people need to, their parents need to have a guardianship set up. Think about the three kids from different strokes. They each had challenges, in their later life. Some, when you look at Gary Coleman, his parents just kind of spent all his money. And you have so many child stars who just had no protections. So when you're talking about minors who are making that type of money, the courts need to set up a guardianship or, depending on where you live, a conservatorship, to make sure that their money is protected and that nobody's taking advantage of them as well.
Would you say more on that? And I know this is on the kind of the spur of the moment, because when I think about conservatorships, the only thing that comes to mind is what happened to dear Britney Spears, who was also from Mississippi, by the way.
Yes. Well, And there are different types of conservatorships. You have a conservatorship of the person and of the estate. It could be the same person who's the conservator. You also have minor and adult guardianships. Just legally, there are just different, requirements as to whether it's a guardianship or conservatorship. But I believe that Brittany had a conservatorship over her person and her estate. And so when you heard Brittany talking about, maybe she was not able to have children or she wasn't able to do certain things and she could not control her money, that told me that she had a conservatorship over both her person and her estate.
Interesting distinction. Very interesting. Okay, lovely. And then with personal property, would you like to say anything about that before I move on to real property?
Yes. One thing that I share very early in my conversations with my coaching clients regarding their assets, there are three things that you need to do when you start looking at your assets. One, you need to identify those. You'd be amazed at how many people have assets that are not, legitimately on their books. You may have something that you purchase with your personal money that you're using in your business and vice versa. So first we identify what your assets are. We inventory those assets, which means, we make a list and we put two columns, personal and business. And then I tell them to improve the classification of those. So when I say improve, if you have a truck that you purchase in your personal name, but you're using it for business, we need to move it over to the business column. What else does that do? That should give you a trigger that maybe you need a different type of insurance. You need a different type of coverage. How does that affect your financing? How are you paying that back? Is it tax deductible? And so that's where the team comes in. Because when we make these decisions annually and we review them, we share the information with the team as a whole. And so you'd be amazed on how many teams that I work with. And we just kind of sitting around on Zoom talking about, hey, well, Mr. Rogers did this, or Mr. Rogers had this come up. Did he tell you he bought an island? And that's just an example. And so we put those plans together.
Well, that's wonderful. It's like you're looking at the full like football game, which is great because I know one of the things you've said in prior podcasts again is this idea of designing a legacy. It's positioning yourself not just for the legacy today, whether it's pre-designed experiences, but also this idea of generational wealth, of seeing that big full picture and then like moving all your quarterbacks forward.
Yes. Now, one of the pitfalls of not planning, think about blended families. Divorce, yes,
Oh,
divorce is on the rise. I mean, it
okay.
really is. It's so common that it's not even a stigma. 50 years ago, it may have been a stigma to be divorced. And so now you have people with a lot of blended families. You have, single parents that have been raising children alone. And they may have, you may have three kids with three fathers, or, there are just a lot of different scenarios. So what does that do for estate planning? The biggest thing that I run into, and it's very unfortunate for blended families, is that you forget to update your beneficiary designations. And so
Oh,
somebody passes, and the
okay.
first or the second wife may get benefits that you should have been entitled to.
That's so interesting. And I'm going to piggyback off of that again regarding Robin Williams. He had very good attorneys, and they had airtight documents. But do you want to know where the problem came up?
Where?
It came up regarding personal property. He was on his third marriage, and the women were fine. The children, though, when it came to the personal property, they wanted the collectibles. They wanted the memorabilia. I mean, Robin Williams, whether baseball hats. I mean, it was the little things, and those children fought over that, and nobody took an inventory and having the foresight to think that those little things would have been something that would have tied up that family in litigation, whether it was like 2 to 3 years or, I mean, and it was reasonable. But again, you're right. When somebody doesn't update those documents or they don't think through certain things, the turmoil that can happen because now people are fighting each other and yeah, yes,
So can I share something else with you?
yes, please.
Another another person that needs to be on your team, especially if you are someone who has a certain amount of wealth, is your business manager. Because, Robin Williams is just kind of living life, taking projects and doing things, but your business manager is the person that pays your bills for you, that makes, sure all the checks clear. They may make sure that your bank statements are reconciled, and they may be the point person that already dealt with the other team and everybody else at the table. So it would have been great for the business manager. Every time, there was a collectible or a sizable purchase, he would shoot that over and say, hey, Robin just purchased this. How do we go forward? And so it's constant communication. It's not
Yeah.
just quarterly. There's constant communication.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. So when it comes to real property, I know you've brought up the value of the insurance agent, as well as this idea of multiple entity structures, also known as equity stripping. Please say more.
Okay. So the concept, and I call it the nursing home concept, it used to be that there was litigation, maybe someone passed away at a nursing home, they'd sue the nursing home, and you'd have these huge settlements. And other businesses do this too, but nursing home and medical professionals have gotten very smart. So say you're just driving down the street and you see ABC Nursing Home. Well, the real estate may be owned by one LLC. The name of a nursing home may be, licensed from an IP company that's housed within another LLC. All the equipment is leased from an LLC that's an equipment company. The staff, they're all contract. They're leased from, a people placement agency. And you put those protections in place so that if you're sued, you have so many entities. And we call it equity stripping because each one of those entities are pretty much cash poor. And the way that you set it up, you would have, basically what I call an umbrella, which may be a holding company. It may be a trust, depending on the type of entity. You'd have the operating company that actually provided the services and all those ancillary companies like the IP company, the intellectual property company. You may have a separate management company. Those are all contracts. They have contracts with the operating company. So everything pretty much looks cash poor. The only company that is not providing services by definition is the holding company. And that's where your funds are. And even if someone wanted to sue you, the holding company has no liability because they have performed no services.
That's fantastic. I think of how America has become one of the most litigious nations in the
Yes.
world right now. And I remember 20 years ago, somebody had said to me, I was at a real estate conference, they had said, there are as many attorneys in law school as there are practicing. And that was 2 decades ago. And I, yeah, and I'm attorneys, better to have them on your side than on the other side of the table. And yet I just think, and it's not just attorneys. I think that today, if somebody sees somebody else as a mark, it's always good to be protected. I don't think someone should do something as such as cutting corners or being unethical, but still nobody wants to be a mark because yeah, somebody could destroy their business and destroy their life, thus destroying their legacy. And
Exactly.
if something can be protected, why not learn about it early, make that investment, fill your head with knowledge? I mean, take the time, slow down, listen to more people, write down some notes. And I think the ones that survive today aren't just surrounded by very smart people. They're the ones that are willing to take the time. It's always the little things that add up. Um, the daily habits of being willing to listen to lots of different perspectives. So one other thing regarding real estate, as a side note, before I ask you about legal strategies for family businesses, you had mentioned something about, let's say that somebody, this was in a conversation in a prior podcast, but I thought it was so interesting. Now, my property is in a trust, real property, but let's say that there's someone whose name is not on the property and somebody passes away. And I thought this was fascinating. You had mentioned something along the, and yeah, I'm going to have you speak on this in a moment, but along the lines of a homestead until one's death, or a leasehold agreement, or a cloud on title. Say more so I don't jumble it up.
Okay, so I believe the question is about what happens to property when somebody passes away,
Well,
but the
if there's
person
two
living.
individuals living together, and let's say the woman did not have her name on the title of the house, he passes away, they're not married, although I think Mississippi might be slightly different than California. California might be, they might feel that one of those individuals could be almost like a common law partner. But say more, if you would, in what somebody could do.
Yes, generally, if you are married and your name may not be on the title to the property, you can actually live there until you pass away. That's for Mississippi. Each state is a little bit different, but you have what's called homestead rights. A lot of people look at homestead like, oh, this is a discount on my taxes, but it's so much more than that. It gives you certain interest in the property in the event that your partner passes away. And it also gives you different options as it relates to judgments and creditors. So you wonder why there are like all these $1 million mansions in states like Florida. Well, in Florida, they have 100% homestead protection. What does that mean? You can have a house that is valued at $10 million and you not have a lien or an encumbrance on the property, and you get sued for $10 million. Well, normally, it would really take selling your house to satisfy the judgment. But if that's your homestead, it is totally protected. Now, in Mississippi, that amount is a lot less, it's $75,000, and it's just different in other places. Some states, it's a percentage of the value of the home. Other states, it's a dollar amount. So, in addition to tax breaks, you just have those protections in terms of being able to live in the home. Now, that is subject to you paying the mortgage if there's a mortgage. So you can't just stay there and not pay the mortgage. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful to know. I came across an individual recently. She was 82, and I don't think her name was on the title of the home, and the guy passed away. And I think that it was set up in such a way that the children received the house. So they basically booted her out. And whew, yeah, not something that somebody necessarily wants to deal with at age 82. And
Right.
and I think that's why it's so important to have these conversations. And for all the individuals that I mentioned that are under age 40 that tune into this podcast and the YouTube channel, this is to get their wheels turning ahead of time, to be as informed as possible, because this is not necessarily going to be covered unless somebody seeks out this knowledge. So let me ask you about legal strategies for family businesses. Is there anything in particular that a family business should be aware of?
Definitely. So people use the term a family business because it's your family that you are in business with. But you still need to follow the same sound business practices. And I would say, belt and suspenders if you're dealing with family, because that makes, there's an extra layer of complexity. And also looking at the business structure. I'll give you an example. So once the LLC was created, that really became, because of the tax advantages and the ease of forming an LLC, a lot of people started deviating towards creating LLCs for businesses. Now, that's great in a lot of instances, but it's not always the best structure. So if you do have an LLC and it's a family business, you need to think about the state that you are forming the LLC in, because the way that it's treated for succession purposes, if somebody passes away, it's different. If it is a single member LLC, in some states, you only have a certain number of days after the person passes away for the estate to wrap everything up. But if it's a multiple member LLC, you have different options. So if you're dealing with a family business, you definitely want to have what I call a titanium operating agreement. And what does that mean? It just means that it's so tight and put together and strong that all the questions are answered. So then we look at belt and suspenders. Does your estate plan and your wishes for your interest in the company, whether it's an LLC or a corporation, do they mirror what the document says? So this goes back to your team. You need to have the same people who are working on your business stuff somewhere at the table with the people that are working on your personal information. Don't have to be the same people, but it does need to be the same table, because you may update it in one place, but not another place. And the thing about a family business, if you are related by marriage and not blood, there's another complexity. Going back to Stephen Covey, beginning with the end in mind. What happens if there is a divorce? What does that do to the business interest? Maybe you don't want to be in business with this person if you divorce.
Well, it's so interesting because these are the conversations that need to be had up front. And I know you've talked before about the prenup compared to the postnup and all of the different facets to talk about before somebody just makes an assumption. I know you brought up the story of family business, and they woke up one day and they couldn't access the bank funds, and it became
Oh my gosh.
quite a shock. Yes.
Definitely. And one thing I would say, whether you have $10 in the bank or $10 million in the bank, anything you do during your marriage needs to be done by contract. Whether you have a prenup or a postnup, any sort of business transaction needs to be done by contract. And you need a cooling off period. So, I'm not going to sign a $1 million contract that goes into effect tomorrow. I may need, 6 months between the time that I execute it from the time that it's effective, because if we do get a divorce or there's a dispute, there are just certain things legally I would need to be able to prove to assert certain defenses. So
Yes. I think oftentimes also, um, especially when individuals are young and it's that honeymoon period of, I don't want to call it illusions because I think it's good to dream and not to become cynical. But I do think that there's an aspect to marriage that is pure business, and that needs to be handled logically and methodically, and to be looked at in those steps and stages of um, you know, updating documents. And I know you're going to speak about trust in a moment, but you're absolutely right. Even with family, I was smiling because I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and they had mentioned, I think their expression is family knows how to do you the best. Like,
exactly.
yeah, and because they take things for granted, and it's not just in Los Angeles. There was a Dr. Jerry Buss who passed away. He had purchased the Lakers, and I think it was the Forum or the Stadium, one of those large pieces of real estate, and each one of the six children had a voting right, and one of the children filed a restraining order on another one of the children, and it just had to do with who had power at shareholder meetings. But I thought, whoo. And it just sometimes it's just either there's too much pressure or it's power, but there can be power dynamics within a couple, just as there are within a family unit, and then you add money to that, and in the context of a family business. And you're right. Sometimes there are meetings where the spouses are invited, and there's other meetings where spouses are excluded, and to know how to navigate all of that. Uh, and you're right, absolutely, to have it in writing sooner than later, and not to feel uncomfortable with it. It might be very new, as you had mentioned before, as people, whether they're TikTok stars from age 10 to 20, these are very new conversations and new reference points and skill sets and capacities that, again, they might not have witnessed in their parents, along with this idea of designing a holistic legacy. So I know today we're focusing in on the legal aspects, but there's even a certain amount of maturity that one has to have the capacity to manage all of this in responsibility.
And one thing that I share with people, you do not have to have all the answers. You just need to be brave enough to get the people at the table who do have the answers.
Yes. Would you speak for a moment into living trusts versus living wills? And I wondered if this is one of the legal considerations that you consider when planning a legacy for a client.
Yes. So, okay, you have certain documents that are testamentary, which mean after you pass away, that's your last will and testament. A living will is just a statement as to whether or not you want to have a feeding tube, if you want to be put on a ventilator, depending on how bad your condition is. Do you want them to continue to treat you for it? And a revocable living trust is almost like having another person at the table. For some people, I refer to it as an LLC on steroids, but a whole lot better with a whole lot more flexibility. So, and less legal oversight. So, when I'm looking at an estate plan, if it is a will-based estate plan, I have certain documents, and if it is a trust-based estate plan, I have certain documents. So now that we're talking about trust, the revocable living trust, some of your testamentary documents, you're going to have that living will because we want to know while you are in your right mind, what are the things that you want, and we're going to have a healthcare power of attorney. Who is that? That is the person who makes healthcare decisions about you in the event that the living will did not detail what it was exactly that you wanted. Sometimes your living will and your healthcare power of attorney conflict. So, say for instance, you did not want to be put on a ventilator, but you named your favorite sister as your healthcare power of attorney. Well, she wants to come to the hospital every day, rub your hand, and say, get better. But you want to go on to the next place. You don't want to be here anymore if you're in a vegetative state. So when they conflict, it's important to have something in writing about who controls. Does the healthcare power of attorney control, or does the living will? And it's generally my recommendation that the living will control because those are your will, your wishes. We also have a HIPAA form. Now, HIPAA forms can be used in so many different ways. It's not just in the event of death. What if you were in a car accident and you were unable to communicate and someone needs to get your records? Or even if you passed away under mysterious circumstances and you're requesting copies of the doctor's progress notes and other things to get to an attorney to establish if you have a legal claim. So it's really important to execute that as well. A durable power of attorney. It is a document that is in effect at the time that you are alive. When you pass away, it is no longer in effect. And basically, it's like having a clone because depending on the powers that you give the person who is your power of attorney, they can do the exact same things you can do, whether you are incapacitated or you're just walking around and you don't feel like doing some of those things. So you have a lot of power you can give someone. And those are just, some of the documents that I give people with a complete estate plan and things that you need to sometimes ask for. Because if you go to an attorney and say, I just want a will, you need so much more than that. And these documents really round out your wishes.
Yes, and that's why I'm so grateful that you're speaking into this today. I know that you offer a course and you've got a good Facebook page as well if somebody would like to learn more. And I think one of the biggest points that you've brought up in collaborating with an attorney such as yourself is not just building that team and the processes in place, but asking better questions and knowing the questions to ask. Because like you had said before, nobody's going to have all the answers, especially if they didn't grow up with a parent who's an attorney. It's not going to be a way of life. It's going to be a brand new way of almost looking at things because it's unless life has happened to them, they're blindsided by it. And the other point that you've mentioned before is the value of checklists. And I know that you've just rattled off a number of documents, and that's very good. Thank you. But that's just like the starting point. And a part of that checklist could be updating the successor trustee. What if they passed away? And to have this, I always think about it as in the context of, well, if we set aside a date once a year to honor the IRS, why not set aside one day a year to honor your legacy, including updating these documents and making sure that everything is in place? And I know that you've been very transparent both on your social media, your Facebook page, as well as in prior podcasts, that there's some of this that we can do, and it might not even cost tens of thousands of dollars.
Yes. So what I've done is I've put together AI prompts, with ChatGPT and all these other tools. And I really do believe that AI is just a tool. It's not going to totally replace people,
And you're
but
not giving your power over and writing term papers or
you're not
legal briefs.
exactly,
Yeah.
but it's a tool. And so I've put together some prompts that you basically put into AI, something, similar to ChatGPT, and you tell it, hi, my name's Scherrie. I'm, X number of years old. This is my profession. I'm a single mother of, I have 3 pets and, I need an estate plan. Where do I start? And so that will give you um,
A
where to
reference
start
point.
on some of these things. Yeah, reference points. Because one thing that a lot of pet owners, they're concerned about what happens to my dog, my cat, my bird when I pass on. They're actually pet trusts that are set up to take care of people's animals. And so what ChatGPT will do is, give you a list of things you may need. Well, based on your age, you may need a living trust. You may need a pet trust. Have you considered? And these are things that are totally free. I don't have an attorney. What type of attorney do I need to see? Based on the information that I put in, what questions do I need to ask my attorney, my insurance agent? And so these are things that you can do today, right now, totally free. And at least you'll have an idea of where to start.
Yes, yes. Well, if they're already on their cell phones, this would be a good moment, a good time to ask ChatGPT. Um, Fantastic. So before I ask you about the holistic legacy that you would like to create, would you like to opine regarding philanthropy or even the legal preservation of a legacy? Any thoughts there?
Definitely. Um, Now, this is my opinion, but I do think that in your estate plan, you do need to have some sort of giving as part of your estate plan. There are so many institutions that have really contributed to me being who I am today. And so there are just certain considerations. Now, people may be wondering, how do I fund this? I do not have a large estate. And I'm not on here selling insurance, but I'm letting you know that if philanthropy and giving back to a school or a church or a cause is something that's important to you, having that insurance agent as part of your team, you guys can also craft a giving plan as part of your estate plan. And that will cost you, maybe $100 a month, depending on what the gift is and your age. And usually with insurance, and we're talking about life insurance, the younger you are, the cheaper the premiums.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I know you've also made a point regarding insurance that sometimes the beneficiary can also be a trust or it can be held in a trust.
Yeah. Now, insurance passes outside of us. It passes outside of an estate. But if you have minor children, let's say that you're in an accident and the children are still under the age of majority when you pass away, you don't really want to give them or a guardian a lump sum of money. But you want to make sure that over time, they have what they need. They have a roof over their head, they have food, and that the people that are caring for your children have a comfortable lifestyle. So it's my recommendation that you consider having the insurance policy pay out to the trust. And there are ways that you can set it up that in perpetuity, your heirs will continue, to reap the benefits of that insurance policy.
That's brilliant. I know that lottery winners, if they take the option of the annuity where it's broken up over a period of time, that's always better than if they get that one lump sum and then they find themselves bankrupt like 3 years later.
Yeah, but even if they get the lump sum, if they really invest it properly and protect it, they can still have money. I think a lot of lottery winners are just not used to that amount of money. And so you spend it and you keep thinking it's just always going to be there.
Yes, yes. Well, one thing that's interesting is some individuals will invest in a spendthrift trust or a generation skipping trust. But I will let the listeners reach out to you. And before you share what you would like your holistic legacy to be, I know you've made a point that there is a cost to doing nothing, whether that's opportunity. And also, it's better to decide today when somebody's proactive to have the control in the front end compared to the back end when it's just reactionary, because that's never a fun place to be emotionally. But sometimes people have to have their hand bit to recognize the value of planning.
So definitely, my holistic legacy, I would like for my children and my children's children to know that I thought of them. And how do they know that? They know that because I've set up a mechanism that in perpetuity, you're not getting rich every month, but you may have $500, $1,000, depending on compounding interest. It's not enough to make you lazy, but enough to let you know that there's something there.
That they won't fall
And
between the cracks.
exactly.
Yeah, or
And we really
starve.
didn't even talk about, yeah, we didn't talk about this, but like the be your own bank concept,
Okay.
that is so powerful when you're talking about estate planning. Because now, when Susie graduates from college and gets married, you don't have to go to the bank to pay for her wedding or to buy her first house. You can borrow it from your trust. And there are just so many things that you can do. So I just want to be thoughtful. I want my holistic legacy to be that I was thoughtful for today and tomorrow.
That's beautiful. What values, in addition to stewardship, do you get to honor by doing the work that you're doing today, as well as developing your legacy consciously?
I love it. I love it.
Well, what values do you think, like in addition to stewardship, maybe the value of just honoring life, the the value of family? What other values, in your words?
Well, yeah, and definitely family. Even though my family is kind of dysfunctional, I love the concept. And there are so many things that I'm doing with my children that, nobody ever showed me how to do. So I'm just enjoying the process and hopefully, you know, building a legacy through them. Because as they see me doing these are things that they can model with their children and future generations as well.
That's lovely. That's lovely. I'm going to bring up an acknowledgement right now of you being a positive role model because, again, not only is dysfunction the norm in most families, not just in America, but globally, but more than that, it's you're making the decisions to build what was not built before you. And I bring up that example again that legacy is not necessarily a conversation when it comes to self-made individuals at their kitchen table growing up, or even their dining room table, or even holiday meals. It's just it's just not talked about. So that's why I want to acknowledge you as a positive role model because you are
Thank you.
taking the steps right now. Yes. So I just it takes courage to take that personal agency, because apathy is always easier.
Thank you so much.
What's the best way for the listeners to reach you before I read out my closing paragraph?
Sure. You can actually go to my website. It's www.scherrieprince.com. That's scherrieprince.com. And I have a podcast too. You can listen to the episodes. There's a lot of free education. And we actually focus on entrepreneurs and building estate plans. So those two places are the best places to reach me. And we also have a Facebook group where you can come and talk to other entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, business owners. And that is the Small Business Owners, Entrepreneur, and Solopreneur Facebook group.
Yes, and you give out a lot of free information, which is lovely, because that can be that initiative to just get an individual to start and not just focus on, well, I can't budget for an attorney right now. They can get over that and just start to open their mind and learn. And just any final thoughts before I close this out?
Definitely. Make a plan. Even if you do it on a napkin, make a plan and publish it. Let someone else know and build a team. If you can do those two things, you are well on your way to holistic legacy planning.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so in closing, I'm Angelina Carleton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder of Legacy Planning, a boutique coaching and advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, but international in those I consult. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners, there can never be enough education or preparation in the moat or moot around your castle. Whether you find yourself with new wealth or generational wealth, may the content on this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your intellectual and emotional curiosity. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you're tuning in on SoundCloud, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, please remember to rate and review, share with a family member, friend, or associate. Or if you're watching us on YouTube, please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to Miss Scherrie Prince for speaking into your legacy.